Hello, Waterloo Region. You're listening to Meet the Candidate on CKMS-FM 102.7 Radio Waterloo. My name is Bob Jonkman. In this episode, we meet Simon Guthrie, the Green Party candidate for Waterloo. In Meet the Candidate, Radio Waterloo provides 25 minutes of free airtime to Waterloo Region candidates running in the 2025 federal election. This is not an interview, but 25 minutes of unstructured time. Candidates could tell you about their platform, the local Waterloo Region issues they'll be tackling, why they're running, or what they do outside of politics. Note that the views expressed are not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. Now, let's meet the candidate, Simon Guthrie, who's accompanied by Eric.
Thank you. And I'd like to, first of all, thank 102.7 CKMS Radio Waterloo for providing this opportunity and this time. Thank you very much. And thank you to Bob for throwing over to us. My name is Simon Guthrie. I am the Green Party candidate for the federal election in 2025 in Waterloo, just a little bit north of where we're sitting today on the Haldeman Tract. I'm here today with Eric Lepp, my friend for the past 5 years, my occasional collaborator and my occasional academic advisor in the Masters of Peace and Conflict Studies program. I'm going to let Eric introduce himself from here, though.
Awesome. Hi. Glad to be here with you today, Simon. As Simon said, my name is Eric Lepp. I'm an assistant professor in Peace and Conflict Studies over at the University of Waterloo at Conrad Grable University College. And I had the joy of having Simon in my class and supervising some significant work that he did here in the Waterloo region.
Yeah, so the first time we met, I think, was early January in 2020 when I thought I was starting a normal master's degree program over at Conrad Grable, and that lasted a little over 2 months before we all got sent home because of the pandemic, of course, and a lot of the discourse has been dominated by pandemic conversation since then.
Yeah. I'll ask you some questions, I think, about what direction you took in your studies because of the pandemic, because I think it was quite innovative and quite forward-thinking. But I think my role here today is to try and introduce you to the listeners here, and hopefully to also draw attention to what you're about here as part of the 2025 federal election. So maybe I'll pepper you with a few questions just to sort of get it going, or what
Please
do you think?
Normally these things end with the lightning round, but yeah, let's start with the lightning round today.
Well, my first question is, who are you?
All right, so I guess you'll be leaving now because I can fill 25 minutes, I think. So yeah, my name is Simon Guthrie, and I've been part of this community for more than 30 years. Before that, I grew up in Ottawa, in a suburb of Ottawa, in a fairly white-collar, fairly civil service-oriented community there. Went through the public school system, went to Colonel By Secondary School out there. I'm sure many of Colonel By alumni are listening to other things this morning, but maybe they'll see this eventually. I always had a fascination with science and with science fiction. The science angle was certainly amplified by, or the fans were flamed by Jay Ingram on Quirks and Quarks, a radio show on CBC Radio that's still there with a different host. But I still remember listening to that every Saturday as we ate our lunch at home. And so that interest in science and science fiction meant that the only thing I could do in post-secondary education was go to physics. And because somebody has to invent the time machines and the spaceships. So I came to the University of Waterloo here. I was drawn here by the cooperative program, by the reputation of the program, and by the adventure of leaving where I'd grown up, leaving where I felt at home, comfortable. I came here. I lived in residence at Renison College. I did my studies. I did my co-op terms. Most of them were back in Ottawa. I managed to live at home for those. I worked for what was called the Atomic Energy Control Board at the time, all the way through to Nortel. Institutions of Canadian science and Canadian engineering expertise, all with different names now, I think. I did a master's degree in physics right away. After that, I thought I could sort of push things a little bit farther. I worked on laser imaging of cancer cells, trying to find them in living tissues so that we could find a non-intrusive way of detecting cancers early. I went to work shortly after that. I worked for couple of companies here in town. First of all, I worked for Christie Digital, worked there for about 10 years. After spending a bit of time at the University of Waterloo as a research tech in a few different labs there. I worked for a smaller company for a little while, but after 10 or 15 years of working in technology, I started to see human problems as a challenge, as an interesting challenge, as an important challenge. Arguably, or not arguably, just as important as technical challenges. And so I started looking for a way to step sideways from what I'd been doing as a technical innovator. And I started taking some workshop courses at Conrad Grable in conflict resolution and mediation. And after a little while, I realized I liked the questions that were being asked. I liked the ways we were approaching the answers. I liked the ways that we were recognizing the humans as the core to any conversation that needs to happen, and understanding where they are and where they're coming from is core to finding any sort of solution. And so I looked for a little bit more than the workshops they were doing, and I found the Masters of Peace and Conflict Studies program. I applied to it in 2019. I was accepted to start in January 2020. And that's where Eric and I intersect. So maybe this is a good time to pass it back to you and hit me with the next one.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating. I didn't realize that you had been working on even cancer research.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, I pointed lasers at anything. I even fired the lasers straight into people's eyes. You know how we normally say, don't look into the laser? I started my studies by saying, I'm going to need you to look straight into the laser.
Okay, all right.
We did it safely, don't worry. There are research ethics rules that we absolutely follow. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've brought us to the point where we intersect. And I think I want to pick up on that, because I think I think there's a unique trait of coming from a tech, a science background, and coming to peace and conflict studies, and then the peace and conflict studies education that I work in. I'm wondering if you could take us through then, because I think this will tell us a lot about who you are. I would like you to tell us about, so you and I, we meet in January 2020. You're in one of the graduate seminars that I was leading on peace ethics and peace practice.
Right.
And then in March, we all go home. We all go home and sit behind our screens for the next year and a half. And I really think you could have been like, you know what, no, I'll just start again whenever we return to normal, as we were saying. It'll get back to normal the whole time someday.
Right.
Can you tell us about what you did with that degree and with that how that path pivoted?
Right. So I think I was a bit of an unusual student in the MPACS program.
Yes.
Mostly in positive ways, I think. But as we got sent home, I was scratching my head saying, what is going on here? What am I seeing? What are we living through here? And, there's all of the stuff that we remember, some of the stuff that we don't. There was we're all in this together. There were the reunions of old sitcoms on Zoom screens that we watched on YouTube as fundraisers for this and that. And, this was a good year before any discussion of should we or shouldn't we have vaccinations and vaccination mandates. It was a period that felt a little bit like a limbo. Like we were all on pause waiting to see what the results would be. And I'd done research in the past. I'd done primary research, collected my own data, collected my own body of work. And so it didn't even cross my mind that doing that again was in any way unusual. And so I started coming up with this idea of an interview project that we could do with people that were living through the pandemic. My initial thought was to just reach out to my friends on Facebook. Sorry, I didn't in the end. Spoiler, you know that. What I did was I talked to Eric. We were taking a class, and so we were on Zoom together regularly, and I sort of pitched him the rough idea of an interview project to talk to people that were living through the pandemic and collect their experiences as sort of a lived or living history, and an oral history even. Of course, my initial idea was far too broad. There was, it was just going to be a bunch of randos that I talked to. rando friends, but together we refined the idea down to speaking to leaders of faith communities in Waterloo Region. I recognized that this was a group that they were quite comfortable reflecting on their realities and their experiences. They were leading groups that were traditionally focused on meeting together in person, whether it was on Friday afternoons or Sunday mornings or any time. There was always a very personal, a very in-person element to those communities. I have been part of faith communities my entire life. I'm part of the Anglican Church. And for all of those reasons, I thought it tied together into a nice, tight project where there was a good hope of getting some general comments, general thoughts from the participants that I had, and stitching it together into something coherent. And so that's sort of what I designed. In the summer of 2020, I interviewed about 15 faith leaders from across the interfaith, diversity that we have in Waterloo Region. Some of them were Christian, some of them were mainstream, some of them were a little bit more unusual, some of them were entirely outside of any Christian tradition. And despite that, I did find some common threads in their experience.
I want to add to that, if I can, that it was remarkable to be in this moment of generational crises. We talked about a once in a lifetime pandemic, or we keep talking about these once in a lifetime things that seem to happen more than once in a lifetime.
2 or 3 times a year. Yeah, that's right.
And we can talk about that when it comes to climate crises too, once in a lifetime or generational events and things.
Yeah, we should get there.
But I thought it was incredibly forward-thinking we enter into a crisis and immediately say, how can I learn about and amplify the voices of people who are struggling? Mm-hmm. And so I want to just mention that
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, you were going through the pandemic with your family, with your communities, and to say, hey, I think we should take note of a larger group and to sort of be a part of that Waterloo Region community.
Sure.
Really impressed me.
Well, yeah, and if I'll jump in there, let's go to the end of the story.
Yeah.
What I was finding from talking to a lot of these leaders was that there were some that were all struggling in different ways. Yeah. There were some that were optimistic as they struggled, and there were some that were less optimistic as they struggled. And what I found, I said that I interviewed them in the summer of 2020. I interviewed them again in the summer of 2021, as many as were still available. And what I found was that the communities that had a focus on looking outwards as well as looking inwards in keeping the lights on and keeping the budget balanced and keeping their communities together, the ones that were building relationships and bonds of community outwards, seemed to be often more optimistic about their situation and about the possibilities for the future. And this ties into some ideas from a guy named Robert Putnam that I read about social capital and bonding and bridging capital. And I think I'm going to have to let you read up on that one, dear listener, dear watcher. I suppose we're streaming this. But the point is that we build bonds within our tight groups. And there are bonds between those groups. You can almost imagine our cities of Waterloo, of Kitchener, of Waterloo Region as being sort of cellular in nature. You have the little groups, whether they're neighborhoods, hockey teams, church communities, knitting circles, whatever they are. And then there are the connections between those. There's the person that's on both the knitting circle and the hockey team. And it's those bonds that I think really define a healthy community. From there, I started looking at the community more broadly than faith communities and looking at how we react to each other, how we connect with each other, and recognizing that elected leaders and legislatures, they have a perhaps unique role in making sure that those connections are happening, that they're nurtured, that they're growing. And that's really the genesis of why I started thinking about elected office in the last couple of years.
Yes. Good. I was hoping you would segue, because I was going to segue from that into this. And I'm just, maybe we can can switch modes, and I can pepper you with some questions,
Yes.
of around the why you are running to be the MP.
Go ahead.
So I'm curious about why you're running to be the MP for Waterloo. And maybe piggybacking on that question is questions of sort of what do you see as missing? What do you yourself, Simon, fill out? And then maybe when we can move from there into sort of what does it mean to be a member of the Green Party and their representative?
So in talking about what I see missing, I'm going to point to the neighboring community of Waterloo of Kitchener Centre, which is most of the city of Kitchener, and their current MP, Mike Morris. I've watched him in the 2019 and 2021 elections. He came in second in 2019. He won in 2021 as the first Green member elected in Ontario. And he showed a different type of leadership than I was accustomed to. I mentioned that I grew up in Ottawa. In Ottawa, it felt like the House of Commons was local news, like they were our neighbors. They dropped by our high school regularly. They were in town constantly because they had no reason to be anywhere else. When I moved here in 1993 for school, I started to notice that was not as strong here. And partly it's geography. You know, it's a 5 or 6 hour trip to get to Ottawa from Waterloo. You don't do it every day. And so, you know, our leaders often find themselves in Ottawa for days at a time or sometimes even weeks at a time. And that physical, personal connection to the community is tough. It's tougher here. However, I saw Mike pushing back against that tendency. I don't know whether he did it intentionally. I suspect he did. And he provided a community-focused, a relational type of leadership that I hadn't seen before from our federal leaders. You see it sometimes from our municipal leaders, but less so at the federal level. And so Mike was doing something, and as I worked through this faith community project, I recognized that it was something necessary. I recognized that it was something that I was comfortable doing as well, that if I was going to be a leader, that was the kind of leader I was going to be, was the one that, you know, you stopped on the sidewalk 20 times as you walked 2 blocks through Uptown because you saw somebody that wanted to engage in a conversation and you engaged right back. And you welcome that and you look forward to that, and that's a core part of who you are as leader.
Yeah, amazing. And to see that in Kitchener Centre, where I live, is quite remarkable. Even, you know, running into Mike in the park, you're trying to give him his time in the park, but you also, hey, I got some questions. What drew you to the Green Party? How is Green Party leadership different? What appealed to you?
There are a few things there, and of course I've already mentioned Mike Morris as sort of a proof of concept that someone within the Green Party can lead in the way that I think our communities need and in the way that I want to lead. But the Green Party itself is it's built up a little bit differently than many of the traditional or entrenched parties that we have, certainly the ones that have held power in Ottawa in my lifetime and in fact in the entire lifetime of Canada. Often you will have a central party leader and his or her office, and they make decisions. They decide how the MPs vote. They decide what the MPs can talk about, what they can engage in their communities, and the topics that they should run away from, that they should say no comment to, and try to change the channel. The Green Party doesn't do any of this. We don't whip votes. That's the practice of telling MPs how to vote, or, you know, maybe just be absent from the House that day. They don't tell us that we can or can't talk about homelessness on our streets. They don't tell us that we can or can't talk about what we're seeing in Palestine right now. They give us the freedom to talk about what's important to our communities, to respond to our communities and what's crucial to them. And I thought that was just a really nice fit with the type of leadership that I want to see more of in Waterloo, in Kitchener, in Canada, and the type of leadership that's the type of person that I think that I am. And that's really why I'm with the Green Party today.
Yeah, I hadn't realized until I trolled your Reddit Ask Me Anything session that you, as a Green Party MP or Green Party candidate, you can speak out on anything. You don't have to. You're not told. You're not sent a script.
That's right. If I want to say that there's a genocide happening in Palestine, I can say that. And yeah, there's a genocide happening in Palestine right now.
Yeah.
I can say that unequivocally. I don't fear recriminations, repercussions from my party for speaking out on any topic.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for saying that, Simon. That's incredibly important. It's about this Reddit Ask Me Anything. I saw a question on there, and I want this to lead to a broader discussion, possibly about strategic voting and what that might look like, or what your thoughts on that are. I noticed on Reddit that you did this week that someone noted an impression that the Green Party was conservatives, like a small C conservative, so fiscally conservative.
Tories with Teslas sometimes.
Yeah, Tories with Teslas, or small C conservatives on bicycles, right? And I thought it would be great to hear from you about what differentiates the Green Party. And you spoke about that ability to have independent voice, to not be sort of funneled into a script.
Right.
But what makes that an excellent choice for the people of Waterloo, and what maybe has been overlooked with the Green Party?
Right. I'd say there have been two conversation topics that come up the most frequently when I'm knocking on doors, and I think I've knocked on about 6,000 of them so far personally. The first one is, of course, our changing relationship with the United States and the threat of tariffs and what the impact of those is going to be. After that, it's strategic voting. And it's really unfortunate that we're having to have this conversation now. It's a flaw of our electoral system that we have to have this conversation. That, Simon, I hear from the door. I like what I see in you. I like what I'm hearing from the Green Party. But I really need to vote to keep out this other party, this other candidate that I'm really afraid of. And so for that reason, and that reason alone, I'm going to vote for a third party that is not the party that I feel most aligned to. And I hear this from too many people. This is because of our first past the post electoral system. The Green Party has advocated and committed to electoral reform and proportional representation for as long as I've been paying attention to federal politics. Yeah. And we will change that. It may take a little while, but we will get there. In the meantime, I can say with total confidence, watching the polls, watching all of the conversations that are going on right now, we do not need to vote strategically in Waterloo. And I want to say that again. We do not need to vote strategically in Waterloo. We are facing a majority government from the party that may be represented by the color red, and how you vote here in Waterloo should be based on the party and the candidate that you think can best represent you, that can best communicate to Ottawa and represent our community there. Yeah. And that's where we have to sit with strategic voting right now. It's not necessary for the reasons that we see today.
No, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. There's no need for strategic voting
Thank you.
Waterloo.
So the message did get through. Yeah. Excellent. So I see that Bob's come back in and is motioning that we should be wrapping up. So let's wrap up. I feel like we could go for a few hours on this, but we're not going to. So thank you once again to Bob Jonkman and CKMS Radio Waterloo for providing us this time. My name is Simon Guthrie. I'm the Green Party candidate in Waterloo for the federal election this year, 2025. Thank you for listening and watching.
You've been listening to Simon Guthrie, the Green Party candidate for Waterloo on Meet the Candidate. The views expressed were those of the candidate, not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors or advertisers. All Waterloo Region candidates were invited to meet the candidate, but some candidates have declined to appear on the radio and some have not responded at all. Remember, the election is on Monday, the 28th of April. Show notes, podcast and video will be available shortly on the Radio Waterloo website at radiowaterloo.ca/MTC. The show is produced by me, Bob Jonkman, in the studios of CKMS-FM. The theme music is Falling Sky by Jason Shaw of Audionautics.com and used under Creative Commons Attribution Only 4.0 International License.